So I was wondering, could you tell us one positive and one negative aspect of Irish political culture?
The positive is probably the sense of tradition and security, and people by and large, and maybe the current climate has changed that, but by and large in the past they trusted their institutions. The most negative aspect is the sheer weight of localism and clientelism, where people feel obliged to put local interests way ahead of national interests to the detriment of looking after their parliamentary duties.
Do you think that same charge could be leveled towards the Senate in particular, that it is sort of a waiting room for TDs who've lost their seats?
There are some very good aspects to the Senate. Many of the debates are very good. It has more time, it's more reflective, there aren't the same pressures, and ministers will often feel that they can be more expansive and more conciliatory in the Senate. But undoubtedly, the fact that well over half the members there will be running in the Dáil election, it does prioritise their sense of values to the detriment of the Senate.
So you feel that there is a necessity for a Senate? You would be against, like Andy Kenny's comments, that we should abolish the Senate?
Well, I suppose I was a member of the Senate for 14 years and I have a great affection for it. And I realise how it can do a very good job in areas that aren't covered by the Dáil. But unless it can get over its own culture, reforms are not going to happen.
What would you suggest for reforms?
Well, there's a good menu of reforms available. One would involve, say, making it the European House. There is no House of Parliament at the moment where proposed legislation to the European Union is discussed in advance. There's no way of keeping up to date with say, what's happening in the European Parliament. That's made a very, very obvious basis. Personally, I would like to see the Senate take on a human rights role, scrutinising legislation from the point of view of Ireland's international obligations in human rights. It's not done at present. There's no Human Rights Committee. The Senate would be ideally suited to do that. And there are about 5 or 6 other very specific things it could do which would enhance the quality of legislation and ensure much better scrutiny.
Thank you. You mentioned human rights, so I'll pass it over to Kira who has some questions about human rights.
Yeah, they specifically relate to your own question. So, the first one was about the recent report done by Intercon for Amnesty International, and they basically outlined that a vision for change, the mental health report, has gone pretty much unimplemented and that spending has gone down. And obviously that's an important area in your remit under human rights. And I was just wondering what your opinion on it is. What's the future? Is the spending just going to, where's the money going to come from? I know it's really difficult.
It's a huge problem, and there is the only UN convention of the 21st century is the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and that includes mental disabilities. And the problem now, say from a human rights perspective, is to try to make sure that governments actually make operational the principled commitments they have given at the UN. And that's a huge task, and governments in times of scarcity are going to pick the easy targets, and the easy targets are the vulnerable. And I think that one way of putting pressure on them is to force them to live up to their international obligations. But that can only be done if groups like the Human Rights Commission actually spell out in detail what that means and give the various pressure groups the legal ammunition they need to fight government.
And is that what the plan is to do?
Well, that's what we're doing, and we're working with other groups there. But it's slow, and we're also working, this is not an Irish problem, it's an international problem. And we work very closely, say, with the English and the Scottish and the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commissions, and indeed with the UN, to try to make this happen, because we're all hugely under-resourced. But this is a universal problem, and by working together we can at least push it. It's slow.
I sent 150 letters a week last year, every week to the TDs, and I never got one reply. But
it's terrible, but I'm
not surprised. Yeah. On Garda Síochána, it's composed of 79% male officers. What's your view about how to promote equality in the force?
I don't have any practical advice to give. I mean, we did in the Human Rights Commission draw attention to the gender balance, and we have said this should be a priority. And I think some of the most innovative people I've met on the human rights side in the Guards of late have been some of the women members who have been pushing very hard for that reform. Now that sounds patronising, but it isn't, and it's a fact. But I mean, this is a Guard operational policy, and when they put their mind to it, they can do it, and that's what they need to do.
And do you think positive discrimination, or what do you think of that idea? Is it to be avoided, or?
No, I don't think so. I think that, without being too dogmatic about it, that if you want to achieve a greater sense of equality, then you're going to have to step out of the ordinary and maybe do things that haven't been done before, and there are areas where there should be positive discrimination.
And the next question I have then is, what is your opinion of Irish immigration policy? In the past, I mean, we had in 2007 and 8 over 200,000 people coming into the country, and now there's 7,800 leaving the country. It just seems like it's, all over the place. And what's your opinion?
I think I'd be slow to be too critical of the government on this. I think we're met with a huge policy, a huge problem for which nothing had prepared them, at the beginning of the wave of immigration. And after a shaky start, they did at least try to put processes in place to ensure there was an appeal system, to ensure there was as much fairness as possible. Now, very often the operation of it maybe depends on people who don't share these particular values, but in fairness, I think they have tried very hard to put a defensible system in place. It doesn't always work, but yeah.